that physical space represents the community that is Merrick Preparatory School, that place where people come together and share and learn and grow.
I'm Agnes Stowicki, Managing Editor with Our Kids. We're speaking with insiders from Canada's leading private and independent schools to bring you insights into school programs, culture, traditions, and leadership. This includes insights from parents, alumni, and administration. This is the Our Kids Insider Perspective.
My professional journey is not very linear, so I'll try to explain it succinctly. And there's a thread that goes through that. So I paid my way through my undergraduate degree by working as a carpenter, and when I finished, I thought, well, that seemed like a natural place for me to go. I loved the physical activity, I loved the learning, and I loved the challenge and building, and I'd studied engineering in part. So I worked as a carpenter, and through that process, what I valued was the learning and then the opportunity to teach junior carpenters coming in. So I thought, well, a natural place for me to go would be back to school, to the learning environment that I was in, and potentially the teaching. So I went back, was doing graduate work, and was contemplating a PhD when I realized that what I really loved was the teaching component of my graduate work. So off I went to a Bachelor of Education, and my professor very astutely said, you know, Kevin, I don't think you're going to be great at classroom teaching, contrary to what I thought. He said, you should check out this place called Outward Bound. They really focus on experiential learning. They really focus on the individual, on the human, and less on the curriculum. So I ended up spending almost 9 years with Outward Bound, and from there I ended up becoming the executive director of a program in Toronto for street kids. Was there for 6 years, and then I was the executive director of Round Square International, based out of London, England, which took me to the other end, to the private school end, and from there on to Ashbury College in Ottawa as marketing, admissions, communications director, and then Cambrian College, which was one of the 24 community colleges in the province of Ontario, as the registrar and running an enrollment center. And then from there to where I am now as head of school at Merrick Preparatory School, which I've been here now just going to my 11th year. So it's starting out as a carpenter and focusing on grad work and a potential PhD, and many years guiding all over from Mexico to the high Arctic, really led me to the value of education and teaching, experiential learning, and that sort of evolved from there to finally leading to a classroom environment or a school environment. Yeah, I think like so many of us probably, it started when I was young. I think my parents were my first inspiration and still are an inspiration to me. I grew up in a house of 10, so it was a large household. And it was really, my parents really emphasized the sense of community rights versus individual rights, that we all must sacrifice for the benefit of the group. We all pitch in, we all help, no one is exempt, we're all equal. And giving and charity were critical in our household, sort of asking first, what can I do for others, before asking, what can I get from you, sort of thing. And then from there, James Raffin, who was my professor in my Bachelor of Education program, he was the first professor or first educator that really spoke to me as a person, not a student. He wanted to know what he could do for me as a person, not what he could do for me as a student or a learner. And he took education on a very different path for me, where the focus was on the individual, not the curriculum, where there was many paths to education, not just classroom teaching, an exploration into experiential learning and outdoor education, and that education was not transactional. It was not me teaching and the student learning, and there wasn't inputs and outputs. There was a relationship, and that really grew when I went to go work at Outward Bound. And I think another great inspiration to me was the educational philosopher Kurt Hahn, who he used curriculum as a medium to get at character development and developing the person. And two things I left Outward Bound with, many things I left Outward Bound with, but when I left Outward Bound, I left with, I have no right to teach a student unless I have faith in them. And that's grown to, I have no right to teach a student unless I love them. And I mean that sincerely. I have to love my students. I have to have faith in my students, and so do my teachers. And if they don't, they have no right to teach them. And above all, compassion. That if without compassion, we can't be educators. We can't be human. But above all, compassion. And then lastly, a big inspiration and guide and mentor to me was a fellow by the name of Jim Hayher Sr. And Jim Hayher Sr. was a very successful businessman, ran a very large company, and then ended up turning his hand to not-for-profits and charities. And he started an organization called Trails Youth Initiatives, where I became the executive director. And Jim reinforced and coalesced all the stuff that my parents and James Raffin and Kurt Hahn and Outward Bound kind of brought together around community, equality, charity, the value of outdoor and experiential education, that the curriculum is really a medium to get to something much larger, and above all, compassion, that we're focusing on the people and their relationship and not on the curriculum. And then from a leadership perspective, he really helped shape and guide my view on leadership around what he would call the care and feeding of your staff, listening and asking questions and directing less, getting out of their way. So I think from my parents, and James Raffin, Kurt Hahn, the great educational philosopher, and Jim Hayher Sr. are probably critical to my development as an educator and as a leader. That's a great question. I think as a young teacher, I thought it was all about the curriculum. I thought my job is to make sure my students left my classes really understanding the curriculum, and that was the most important thing. And as a young leader, I think I almost exclusively focused on setting direction, setting goals, helping people have a clear goal and clear direction of where they're going and where the organization is going. And all those things are still very important. You have to teach the curriculum. That's why the students are there ultimately, to learn about physics or math or English or philosophy or history. And certainly in an organization, you have to be able to have a clear goal and a clear direction to help build a team and everyone's going in the right way. But I think I've learned or added layers to that. And I think that the more important thing for me now as a leader and a leader in education is what I mentioned earlier, is if I don't love my staff and if I don't love my students, if I don't have faith in them, I can't lead them, I can't teach them. And the curriculum, the material we're trying to get across to our student really is a medium. And as someone who studied science and engineering, physics, if you put back in the time, grade 13 physics question in front of me, I couldn't solve it. And what I remember was what I learned about myself and the challenge of pushing myself through curriculum that was hard. So curriculum is a medium to get to character development, to becoming the best person you can be. And with staff, it's the same. It's setting the bar high. It's having faith in them that they can reach that bar and exceed it. Showing them that there's more in them than they think. And I think of a guy who a lot of people know. His name's Yvon Chouinard. He started two really big companies called Black Diamond and Patagonia. And he talks about something called Let My People Surf. And I think about that a lot. And I think a lot about how do I get my people to surf? How do I get my students to surf? And I don't mean on a literal wave, but on a wave of success. How do they get into that groove on that wave and fly in a sense? And that's partially impelling them and propelling them into experience. But I think the big thing is let them surf, let them grow, get out of their way, give them the tools, not necessarily the curriculum, and they'll be successful, they'll fly. And that starts with love, that starts with faith, that starts with working on character development. There's lots about the school that resonate with me, that the individuals, the students, the teachers, the staff. But when I think about the school, I think about a community. I think about my office sits out this door, which you can't see, out to a snack bar, which is sort of the nexus point, the meeting point. It's where everyone passes through from the front foyer to the dining hall. It's where people gather after class. At the end of the day, they have snacks there. They kind of hang out. And that physical space represents the community that is Merrick Preparatory School, that place where people come together and share and learn and grow. It's not the classroom setting, it's not the whiteboard or the technology, it's the person. And so I think what resonates with me most is that development of community, of coming together, of sharing, of learning and growing together. And I think that's a metaphor, if I can say that, for something that I think resonates, that we all need around the world, that we need to come together as a community, not as individuals, to hear and listen to each other. And we typically have 25, in a school population, maximum population of 60 students, we typically have 25 different nationalities represented in the student population. And that diversity of coming together and listening to understand versus using 2 ears and 1 mouth in proportion, I think is really important. And I think that's what resonates with me most about our school. The first word that pops into my mind is family. And maybe I'll use an analogy from one of my mentors, Jim Hayher Sr., who talked about education or the brain as a pot with a lid on it. And as educators, our job is to fill that pot with water. And we could pour gallons of water on that pot with the lid on it, and only a very little bit will leak in, and a little bit of knowledge will be retained, but the vast majority is going to splash off. So our job as educators, our job at Merrick Preparatory School is to lift the lid off. And how do we do that? How do we lift the lid off? Well, we lift the lid off with relationship, with love, with faith, with caring, with getting to know them as a person, not as a student. And so once we lift the lid off, our job as educators is really easy. Just pour the water in, and it's like a sponge. The students just soak it up. So I think the culture of Merrick Prep is about family, is about community, it's about lifting the lid. As educators of our job, if we distill our job down to ensuring our students leave with the knowledge that they're coming here to learn about, the curriculum, the math, the physics, the history, the philosophy, the English, then the most important thing in my mind is to lift the lid off. And that lid cannot be lifted. You cannot learn if you don't feel safe, if you don't feel trusted, if you don't feel that your teacher has faith in you. And so I always tell our teachers that your job, you have one job and one job only, and that's to lift the lid off the pot of learning. Once that lid is lifted, any magic happens. So I think the culture of Merrick Prep is around family, is around community, is around lifting that lid. Yeah, I think our students come in grade 9, 10, or 11, or even 12. So the journey is going to be a little bit different depending on their entry point, what grade they come in. And the older students, being a little more mature, are a little more open to the learning, perhaps, or a little more open to accepting us as trusted peers, as opposed to a teacher that sort of lives in the closet and comes out and teaches and then disappears in the closet. They're just a teacher. They're not a human. And maybe that journey is best described in a little story. I'll tell you that. Again, my office is adjacent to the snack bar. I often work late. My door is closed. The students don't know I'm here, and I'm not eavesdropping, but I hear what they say. And after COVID, when we had our first full year back in the school, which was 2021, 2022, with all the students back, we had a student who had been with us since grade 9. He was in grade 12. He was a challenge in grade 9, I'll say. And we had a young boy coming into grade 9 who came in with a bit of an attitude and a bit of a chip on his shoulder, I guess I could say. And it was after evening study. It was about 9:15 at night. And I could hear this young grade 9 boy. It was just the beginning of the second week of school. And he was talking about how, this thing about that teacher and this thing about that teacher, and using not a lot of profanity, but a little bit. And just kind of slagging the teachers or slagging the school, that it's a school and we're here to learn, and sort of a little bit of negative talk. And this student who was in grade 12, and I could hear him very clearly, he had a very deep voice, and my office is not far from where they were sitting. my door was closed, and I just heard this. I heard, "Hey man, that's not how we roll here. These people are here to help you. And if you don't want their help, you can't stay." And I thought, wow, here's a kid at grade 12 who is a challenge in grade 9, and it's not me or the teacher talking to that student and trying to bring them around. It's a grade 12 telling them. The interesting story to this is a year later, we have a new student in. This student is from Turkey. The first student, the elder, was from Nigeria. The student that I just spoke of, who had a bit of a chip on his shoulder, was from Vancouver, from Canada. And this Turkish student comes in, and this grade 10 boy now, the grade 12 has graduated, the grade 9 is now in grade 10, and the same thing happens. It's week 2, and this grade 9 Turkish boy has got a bit of attitude and chipping at the teachers, this and that. And the grade 10 boy sort of said the same thing. He said, that's not true. That's not what the teachers want for you. They care. They really care for you, and they really want to see you succeed. So I think that's the journey of a Merrick Prep student is they, not all of them obviously, but some come in with a bit of attitude, some come in scared, and that's where you're seeing the attitude come from. They're far away from home. It's their first time away from home, regardless of what grade they're coming into. And I think a lot of it has to come from fear and establishing themselves with their peers and figuring out what the rules are and what the pecking order is. And they really quickly realize there's no pecking order, that everyone's equal, that doesn't matter what gender or sexual orientation, nationality, religion, language, grade, you're all here as a family, and we're all participating and we're all learning. And so that first week, I think that settles out. The journey, I guess, would be that next second week to 6 weeks was a little bit of a honeymoon period. And then the wheels kind of come off for November and December. And then the big change happens when they come back after December break and they realize, wow, they really do care, that no matter what I've done over the first 3-4 months, they're still here with me. They're not going anywhere. And they start to see the staff less as teachers and staff, and I wouldn't say peers, but they start to see them as equals, that they're not better than or above, but someone who's there to help them, someone who's there to coach or guide, but they're not better. It's not a teacher-student relationship. It's we're here together equally as people. And so how do we make this place special? How do we make your experience the best it can be? And I don't know if that really answers the question on the journey of a student, but I think it gives some understanding of what our students go through when they first come and where they end up. And it's typically, it doesn't take long. I mean, by January, regardless of the grade, they're all on the same page, and then it's just sailing from there. Pretty special. Yeah, I've worked for a couple of different startups as executive director, and this school was very much a startup when I started. It had been in existence for a year before I joined. So I think as a young school, talking about turning points, as a young school, I think we were very much still trying to find our way. What's our mission? Who do we want to be? What's our purpose? And we started out just as grade 11 and 12, university preparatory. We had very little diversity in our student population. We had basically one nationality. We were only boarding, only 11 and 12, and no local day students. And we went along that way for the first 4 or 5 years. And then in 2017, 2018, we really sat down and said, well, okay, now we've got this sort of base that we've worked with. Where do we want to go from here? What do we want? And that was a whole school input. Everyone had a say, from the kitchen to the maintenance to the cleaning to the teachers. It wasn't one voice. And everyone agreed on 4 main driving principles, which out of that grew a much more clear core values and mission statement, which we have now. But we decided on size. So we believed and still believe that we don't want to have any more than 80 students in the school. And there's lots of reasons for that, and there's lots of research on that. But you can't have an emotional relationship with 500 students, but you can with 60. boarders and 20 day students. You can know each and every one of them. And if we want to lift that lid off, I have to have a relationship with my students. I have to have faith in them. I have to know them. So we said 60 boarding students, 20 day students, that's it. Average class size 10. We're not going to change that. That's our size. The second one was our diversity. We had a kind of one or two countries represented in the student population. We said, if people really want to learn, we need to see difference and we need to learn from difference. So we set a goal of 25 countries represented in our student population every year, with a goal of no more than 4 students from any one country. And the third was exploring day student population. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have some day students, some local kids from the community coming in and bringing in the Canadian perspective, and for them to go and leave our school and go back into the community with this 25 different world perspectives that they could share in little tiny Merrick? Wouldn't that be great? And then we also wanted to move down to grade 9 and 10. We were just grade 11 and 12, which has great value as a prep school, but it's churn. Kids would come in grade 12 and leave. Kids would come in grade 11 and 12 and leave, 2 years max. So it's very hard to build a culture, to build a sense of home, of family, of belonging when you have constant, every 10 months, a turnover. So we thought, if we want to build that culture of family, of community, of focusing on the individual, of lifting the pot, we need to have time to build relationships. And that can happen in a year, but I think it can happen a lot better when you've got students staying for 4. So size, diversity, day students, and adding in grade 9 and 10. And then from that grew our branding, our kind of branding mission or values: courage, community, and compassion, and reaching beyond our grasp. But there's more in us than we think. And that kind of came out in 2018, 2019. And then the turning points of adding in grade 10 first, and then grade 9 over the next few years, and then increasing our diversity through to 2022. And we hit that 23 to 25 international students in different countries represented in the student population. So those would be the critical turning points. COVID didn't change much for us. We changed. The word pivoted is too often used, but within a week, because we're small and we can change quickly, within a week we had set up a whole camera system, 2 cameras in every classroom, toggles on the teachers, a camera followed the teachers, and our students were learning online as if they were in the class. And we still have that, and we can talk about that later, about technology. But so COVID didn't really impact the way we taught. Anyway, that would be my focus on the pivotal points, was that after 4 years, a real deep evaluation of who do we want to be, what do we value in education, how do we educate people, and what's most important to us, and those were the things we came up with. Yeah, well, certainly technology is not going anywhere. It's here to stay. And my partner works for a large international firm, and she works with CIOs, chief information officers, and their view is, if technology is not at the front end of your spear on your strategic planning, you're gonna fall by the wayside. So you've always got to integrate technology in anything you're doing, and certainly we believe that. But I would also go back to the pot and lid analogy, that we could have the greatest technology in the world, but it isn't going to change learning. It isn't going to increase knowledge gathering. It isn't going to change who someone is as a person if we can't lift the lid off the pot. So it starts with relationships. It starts with having faith in your students, loving your students, building that relationship and trust. And then the learning happens. And whether you're using technology or a chalkboard, whether you're using the latest and the greatest coming out of Microsoft or Apple, kind of is irrelevant, because if you don't have that starting point, you just got technology. You're not having learning. Having said that, technology is important. It can't be avoided. It is important. It is integral in our lives. All of us have one of these close at hand. So we use technology as the teachers see fit. as the curriculum would suggest or dictate, whether it be in science or English or philosophy classes. We use Microsoft Teams, we use Microsoft OneNote, all the course material is available electronically. We record every single one of our classes, so every class has a big camera and microphone, speakers on it. Students are sick, that's no big deal. You can take your classes from home, and it's like being in the class with your teachers and your peers. You're just at the back of the class and you see the back of everyone's heads and you're part of class. If you're struggling with your homework and you're not understanding what that teacher taught in the middle of an English class or a math class, you can jump on OneNote, the class is recorded there, and you go, yeah, I think it was around the end of the class when they were talking about this concept in algebra, and you can slide it forward and watch that section of the class that your teacher was teaching. Oh yeah, now I remember. You can continue working on it. So we do use technology, and as I said, it's critical. But it's not our focal point, and it never will be, and I don't think it ever should be, because if you're not starting with relationships and understanding your student and what your student needs, and understanding them as a person, not just a student, you can throw all the technology you want at it, it's not going to make any difference. So technology is a tool, just like a chalkboard is a tool, just like a whiteboard is a tool, and you use the tool appropriately. Yeah, we're pretty proactive on that. I'm not saying conflict doesn't happen here, but it's very quickly addressed. And I'll outline a few things that help paint that picture, and then I'll talk about how we deal with conflict. So every Wednesday we have an all-staff meeting. It lasts for 1 hour, and all staff are there: teachers, residential life staff, kitchen staff, maintenance staff, cleaning staff, admission staff. Everyone's there, and everyone has a voice and everyone has a say. And we talk about every single student. How's Johnny doing? How's Mary doing? Where are their gaps? And then we build a success strategy for that student that we start to implement the next morning. And each student has an advisor, and that advisor acts as the student's advocate. They know the student the best. They're what we call key kids. They meet with that group of students, 6 to 8 students every day for an hour. And they have a specific curriculum that we run through on Wednesdays, sort of a life skills curriculum. So when you have everyone meeting once a week for an hour, and we discuss every student and anyone that sort of we sense is struggling, and that might come from the kitchen staff. Yeah, Johnny comes in every morning and has breakfast, and has a full breakfast. I noticed the last 2 days, he's just had a little bit, he's picked away at it. Cleaning staff. Mary always has her bed made every morning. Last 2 days, she hasn't had her bed made. It's kind of odd, not normal behavior. Shoes are always lined up. Yesterday, they were kind of a mess. Maintenance staff. You know, the gym is always in great shape. Last night, I saw 2 holes, dents in the wall from weights being lifted. Don't believe that's unusual. Teachers, homework not getting done, students not paying attention, whatever it is, everyone's contributing. And then the advisor would then meet with the student and say, hey, how are you doing? What's going on? And because we have that relationship, because we have a small number of students, they very quickly find out, oh, you know, I wasn't feeling well, or my dog died, or I had an argument with my mom, or I'm really stressed about going to university in 2 years and my marks aren't where I thought they would be, or whatever it is. And then we can start working with that student to help them move forward. But when you've got every single person in the building having eyes on and ears open, and once a week you meet to discuss every student, students don't fall through the cracks because there are no cracks, and that avoids the conflict. We also have weekly emails. Every single parent gets an email every week from each one of their students, their child's teachers. We have a 24-hour response time to any phone call or email. We have report cards once a month, not once a semester or twice a semester. We have a student council that's very strong. We have mandatory co-curriculars every Monday and Thursday where students come together and cooperate and problem solve and play sports. So, and the students sometimes come into my office and call me dad. I mean, they're embarrassed. So that conflict, while it does happen, is kind of cut before it starts at every turn. That would be with staff, that would be with students, that would be with parents. If we do have a conflict, I'm really big on everybody's involved. So we get together in my office and we do what I call a VOMP session, vent, own, moccasin, and plan, or vent, own, walk in someone else's shoes, if you will, and plan, so that we don't keep bumping onto this sort of idea of nonviolent compassionate communication, or compassionate communication, of trying to really understand where you're coming from, but you also need to really understand where I'm coming from, and I got to take ownership of what I said or did. And then how do we avoid this in the future? Because we're not going anywhere. We're going to be here, if you're in grade 9, for the next 4 years, and so are you. So how are we going to work together? How are we going to come together as a family? How are we going to come together as a community and support each other? Because the whole point of life is not to bump up and grind up against people. It's about, how do we lift people? How do we lift ourselves? And that's what we're here for. So let's figure out a way to do that, because then it's really fun and interesting and enjoyable. Otherwise, it's just a grind, and that's no fun. And part about being a member of Merrick Preparatory School is having fun. If you can't have fun, then it's really hard to learn. So you got to be having fun. So with resolving conflict, I'm not saying it doesn't happen here, but it rarely happens here. It's addressed before it develops, and if it does develop, it is very quickly addressed with an immediate meeting. We don't wait for it to percolate or get worse. As soon as it's identified, we're on it, and we're communicating with mom and dad, or guardian or parent or grandparent back home, and meeting here in my office with all stakeholders. If it's to do with the teacher or another student or kitchen or maintenance, we're all involved. It's not me as a principal and a student. It's a community. We're all responsible, including the students. Everybody's got eyes and ears on all the time, and I hear from kitchen staff, maintenance staff, cleaning staff saying, "Hey, I noticed so and so did this," or I noticed I was in so and so's room cleaning and that happened, and I'm like, okay, that's on the radar. And then I immediately, as crazy as this may seem, I immediately send an email out and say, "Hey, Dan noticed this about Johnny. Anybody else notice anything?" "No, nothing." "Oh, okay, it was a one-off." Or, "Yeah, I noticed he didn't have his homework done. He always has his homework done. He's a little late for class. His tie wasn't done up today. He's always perfectly dressed." All these little things, if everyone's watching, pick up and might or might not be telling us something. And then we have our advisor who has that special relationship with the student. We all do, but that one person who's maybe a little bit closer to that student can have that conversation. And because the students feel safe, because we focus on relationship, they say, "Yeah, this is what's going on for me." I'm like, "Okay, great. How do we help?" That's what we're here for. Yeah, I think the first point would be, and I don't mean to be self-effacing or deflect the question, but it wouldn't be. I think you said it wouldn't be I, it would be we, because I am just one person, and I don't want to say I sit in my office and push paper, but and I have a relationship with the students, and I live on campus, but it's us, it's we, it's the owners, it's everybody. It's the res life, it's the teachers, it's kitchen, it's maintenance, it's cleaning, it's admissions. So I think, if I may spin the question a little bit, what would we be remembered for? Or what would, looking back, what would the staff currently be remembered for, or hoped to remembered for, I think. And I can't speak for all the staff, but I think they would all have the same view. I think we're pretty much all on the same page, that we would want to be remembered for instilling love in our students, and instilling that they are valuable, that they have something to say, that they have something to contribute, that learning here is about learning who you want to be. And I'm not talking about your profession. I'm talking about who you want to be as a person. When you swing your feet over the bed in the morning and your feet hit the ground, how do you want to show up? Today, tomorrow, for the rest of your life? What do you want to be remembered for? So I think if you were to ask, way forward in the future, what would I want to be remembered for at the school? I think it would be, what would we want to be remembered for? And I think it would be helping people come to see their full potential, but getting them to think about, what do you want to be remembered for? Who do you want to be? How do you want to show up in the world? And not as a professional, not as an engineer, a lawyer, a doctor, a carpenter, or a plumber, but as a person. And that's what we're driving at. The curriculum, I don't want to say it comes second, because they're here to learn these physics so they can go into engineering, or learn to be critical and analytical thinkers to go into whatever they want to study in university. Absolutely, these are important. But they're second to who you are as a person, and then who you are as a professional, that'll come later. That'll work itself out. So looking back, what do we want to be remembered for? We want to be remembered for helping individuals become the best they can be, discovering the best they can be about themselves, and how do they want to show up in the world? How do they want to contribute to a better world? I think that would be what we would say. I think I'd start with where I left off, the answer to the last question. Who do you want your child to be as a person, not as a professional? So many times I hear parents talking about, I want my child to study X so that they can get into university Y, so they can have this profession. And perhaps too simplistic of me to think this way. That will take care of itself. They're going to figure that out. We all do. We all get off to university and we start in engineering and discover it's not for us, and we get into philosophy, or we start in, we do a general arts degree and then we end up studying medicine. Those things will happen, and they'll happen when we discover who we are as people. So I think, and I don't mean to, I've talked a little bit about this, or a lot about this in this interview. Absolutely, the curriculum is important. They need to learn the content, they need to learn the material, they need to gain the knowledge. That's critical for their success in university and in life afterwards, in whatever profession they choose, but that will come. So if I gave advice to parents, I would say, who do you want your child to be as a person, not as a professional? And then pick the school that fits that. So you're looking for values alignment. You're looking for what traits or characteristics do you want in your child, and does that school live those values? Does that school purport those values? Who's running that school? Are they oozing that out of their pores? Are their staff living that? Does the character of the plant engender that? So I think that's what's more important in my view, because the professional stuff and the curriculum, that'll all work itself out. The learner will figure that out. But the person, that's the stuff, that's the juice of life. That's the stuff that gets me up in the morning. That's exciting. When you think, hey, I can help this person find their path as a person, and they'll find their path as a career. They'll figure that out. So advice to parents, who do you want your child to be as a person, and find a school that's in value alignment with that, and then everything else will fall into place.
For more information about this school, you can visit their profile at ourkids.net.